Chapter 1. Mother and Daughter. July 1st, 2005.
Lily, I'm going to need you to keep pushing, love. Keep going.
Lily Rossiter let out the constant wails of labour, her teeth gritted, veins bulging from her forehead, her sheets drenched in tears and sweat, and her soft hands grasping those of her parents. On either side of her, her midwife was kneeling at the edge of the bed, tending to her as she continued to push, letting out a high-pitched scream, the sounds of which rung throughout the entire hospital. Her mother, Sandra Rossiter, leant over her, pressing her forehead against Lily's.
Come on, baby. Almost there.
She encouraged, as Lily closed her eyes and grimaced, giving another push followed by another ear-piercing scream. Her father, Grant Rossiter, however, seemed less primed for this situation. His face read only the emotion of a panic-stricken father, unsure of how to deal with his daughter's situation. His grip was loose, and if he was a man of less honour and love for his own child, he might have pulled it away. Because while his wife had birthed Lily at 31, she was giving birth at merely 18. However, for Grant, these constant thoughts had plagued his mind for the previous 9 months of Lily's pregnancy, and unfortunately these intrusive seeds of reflection had led to a neglect in his duty as a supporting father. As Lily began to scream again, he felt the grasp come from his little girl's hand, a vision of the child he had raised flashing ever so briefly in his eyes, a small girl running across a playground into the arms of her father as he held her up in the light of the sun, laughing and hugging, the most essential thing in his life. But this image of innocence was disrupted by another shriek, before disappearing forever into a fog of maturity.
Almost there, Lily. Keep pushing, love.
The midwife continually encouraging the young girl, before Lily gave one last push, which seemingly drained all of the remaining energy she possessed. And as the tears ran down her face, she slumped back, letting go of her father's hand as her deep breaths were drowned out by the crying of a newborn baby. Her parents looked over at the midwife, while Lily's consciousness was on a knife's edge from sheer exhaustion. Drenched in sweat and tears, she reopened her eyes to see before her a beautiful little baby, screaming and wailing in the bright lights.
Lily, it's a beautiful little girl.
Sandra whispered in wonder, immediately becoming overwhelmed in the moment, a mixture of relief and anxiety all coming out in one. However, Grant was frozen, just staring at the baby, watching as the midwife approached Lily with her precious newborn, covered in vernix, still screaming and waving its tiny little limbs around. The midwife placed the baby in Lily Rossiter's arms, and she began to cradle it. Her hands shook feverishly, and her leg quivered with auspicious anxiousness.
Oh, shh. It's okay. It's okay.
She gazed at her child with a love she had never known before, as the midwife watched over her.
Should I get the dad?
The midwife asked. With tears streaming down her face, Lily nodded slightly, although her parents, especially Grant, were less enthused at this idea. 4 young men sat in the hospital waiting room. Camden, the Rossiter's youngest son, aged 16, sat with his thick black entanglement of hair covering his face, using a pocket knife to shave plastic off his chair, while he hummed low tones from television shows. Ashley Graves and Owen Ellis were 2 19-year-old boys, who had been best friends since primary school, Ashley becoming an almost adopted son of the Ellis family in the previous months. And in the middle of them sat Owen's younger brother and Lily's boyfriend, Troy Ellis, his foot constantly tapping against the cold hard floor of the waiting room, his hands white-knuckling the flimsy plastic he sat on, rocking back and forth. Like Lily, Troy was only 18, and the sheer enormity of the situation was bearing down on him. His anxiety had taken a hold of him, and he was shaking uncontrollably, as his older brother soon wrapped his arms around him, trying to calm him down, before Troy leant his head on his brother's shoulders. A nurse walked into the waiting room accompanied by another couple, Sean and Diane Ellis, who were Troy and Owen's parents and noticeably younger than Grant and Sandra.
Troy, are you ready to meet your daughter?
Asked the nurse. Troy's hand shook as he nodded slightly, slowly pulling himself up with the assistance from Owen. Troy led the way with the other 3 boys and his parents trailing behind as the nurse showed them to Lily's room. They entered to see Lily with an exhausted but relieved expression, as Troy let out a slight laugh of gratification as he approached his girlfriend and his newborn baby daughter. He knelt beside the bed, with tears forming around his eyes as he looked at his child.
Hello, little one.
He nervously let out, placing his hand out as the child's tiny fingers wrapped around his index finger. He began to laugh in elation before looking at Lily, kissing her passionately, holding their child. And as they separated, he looked deep into her eyes, his head still shaking in disbelief.
I love you.
He whispered.
I love you too.
The others watched on with adoration. However, Grant Rossiter was still emotionless, and while his wife leant into him, he watched the two with a lethargic manner towards his new granddaughter, thoroughly distinct from the reaction of Sean and Diane, who seemed thrilled with the new addition to their family. The other boys, especially Camden and Owen, seemed gratified with their niece's birth, as Ash watched on, enchanted by the love felt in the room. Two families were tied together by the birth of an angel.
So, what's her name?
Asked Sean Ellis. As Troy was marvelling at the baby, Lily looked up at Sean and replied.
Haley?
Troy then removed a golden bracelet from Lily's wrist and began to dangle it in front of Haley as she moved her tiny hands towards it.
Happy?
Lily asked Troy, still with his gaze transfixed on his daughter.
She's incredible.
Troy muttered, and just like that, Troy's anxiety about being a father had all been alleviated, and for just these brief moments, he felt nothing but love for Lily and his daughter. He kissed Lily again as the family watched on. July 2nd, 2005. The following morning was cold and bleak as thick clouds rolled over the hills of the Lake Evans Ranges and into the small town of Hulls Creek. The rain was heavy and bucketed down at the hospital. However, it was unusually quiet for a Saturday, not having the usual rush of formerly intoxicated patrons and senior citizens falling down steps to alarm the staff. The sliding doors opened, and out emerged Lily and Troy carrying Haley in his arms, as the trio huddled underneath an umbrella. Sean brought around a car to the front of the hospital. His 1997 black Holden Commodore slowly pulled in front of the two as he got out, running to them, trying not to get drenched.
Want me to drive, bud?
He asked.
No thanks, Dad. We've got to make a stop first,
replied Troy. Lily was surprised by this announcement.
We do?
She asked, a curious smile across her face as Troy smiled at her, Sean retracting as he turned to his son.
All right, bud. Have fun.
Thanks, Dad. Love you.
Sean replied.
I love you too, mate.
They embraced before Sean patted his son on the shoulder with a look of great pride in his eyes. Troy buckled Haley into her baby seat, watching as she fell fast asleep. And when he got into the driver's seat, Lily was facing toward her baby, just watching, admiring her little button nose and chubby cheeks. A small knitted beanie covered her head and wearing a pink onesie with white floral patterns across it.
She's beautiful, isn't she?
Said Lily with an unconscious wonderment.
Gets it after her mother, I reckon. She's got your nose.
Troy ran his fingers through her long black hair. Haley smiled back at Troy.
So, where are we going?
Nowhere special. Just need some time away from them before tonight.
Oh God, I completely forgot.
Sophie exclaimed, cupping her mouth in her hand.
Honestly, fuck that.
I told them not to plan it, but they're your friends, and they haven't stopped talking about your first drink back.
Lily chuckled knowingly.
And they do realise I've got to feed her, right?
I tried explaining that to them. Watermilk and juices is what Mum got for you. Just fingers crossed they don't try to slip any vodka into it.
I'm sure they won't,
said Lily. Troy drove off and out of the hospital entrance, making his way onto the open roads of Hulls Creek. The rain had begun to recede as the sunbeams peeked through the heavy clouds. Bright rays bounced off the asphalt as the Commodore cruised along the road. Troy and Lily simply held hands, knowing that there would be challenges for both of them. However, for now, things seemed right. Life seemed complete, the heavens opening up above them, as a slight rainbow began to form over Hulls Creek. Hulls Creek was a small town with a population around 5,000 people, and about a 3-hour drive northeast of Melbourne, Victoria. However, while small in size, it was still enough for a functioning community. The town contained the essentials to run smoothly, including a fire station, a police precinct, a primary and secondary school, supermarkets, cinemas, and a small pub which was seen as the heart of the town, as well as a football club which was the centre and pride of Hulls Creek, a famous club with much history, including several premierships and a few names playing in the AFL. It was, however, a reasonably private community, as Hulls Creek wasn't so much viewed as a holiday destination during school holidays, much like other small Victorian towns, but rather as a pass-through location for holidaymakers on their way to the mountains of Lake Evans, where snow resorts and lakeside cabins were the getaways of choice. But despite being an insular community, Hulls Creek was able to persevere, running off support of its own labours, as well as a thriving dairy industry, with farmers bringing in significant profits for the town. Many of the townsfolk had lived there their whole lives, not feeling any temptation to migrate to the bustling streets of Melbourne, but rather enjoying the peaceful communal lifestyle that Hulls Creek provided them with. The town was named after the creek that ran down the middle of the main town, as small fishing boats would pass through on their way to Lake Evans about 20 minutes down the stream on the edge of the camping grounds, through to the enormous body of water that resembled a picturesque image from a postcard. The townsfolk were hard-working, and within Hulls Creek there was an almost unspoken agreement about how the help that they would receive from outside the town was minimal. So coming into this town and being accepted required those to be able to contribute at all times needed. Flooding and bushfires were met head-on by the community, ensuring that no one was ever left alone. And being such a small town, many of the citizens knew each other from young ages, and as a result many marriages were between high school sweethearts, such as Sean and Diane Ellis, themselves giving birth to Troy and Owen at a young age. However, Lily Rossiter's parents, Grant and Sandra, were different. Sandra was a local who excelled in high school, leading her to the University of Sydney where she met Grant Rossiter. The pair had then moved back to Hulls Creek in order to spend time during the final years of her mother's life, while she struggled with her Alzheimer's. However, after her passing, they never moved back. Grant was more traditional, therefore not fully supporting the birth of Hayley, but given the religious nature of the town, any actions taken to prevent this birth would have landed the Rossiters and the Ellises in hot water within the community. But despite all this, the town was starting to garner recognition, and many families were slowly beginning to move to the town as a way of getting a fresh start and being part of a small yet loving community. The sun had emerged now as the Commodore drove along the roads through the clouds of vapours as the heat lifted the rain off the asphalt. They eventually arrived at Wombat's Post, a small park just outside the main town, with picnic areas and a famous trail that stretched for several kilometres along the side of the creek. Troy pulled into the car park as Lily had a wide grin on her face.
Of course you picked here.
It's special to me.
He replied. This park had been the place where Troy and Lily had shared their very first kiss over 2 years ago. Just 16-year-old kids who at the time were simply elated to find out that one another had been enamoured with each other. And from there, that love had created a life. They exited their car and walked a few hundred metres down the trail, taking in the sounds of the kookaburras laughing in the gum trees, as well as a tawny frogmouth, as its calls could be heard across Wombat's Post. The path ahead was muddy and damp, but they soldiered on, trying not to become soaked by the water falling off the trees as the wind whistled through the branches. They continued for some time before finding a small clearing amongst some willow trees. Placing a blanket over the wet grass, Troy had prepared a small lunch for his new family. Salad rolls with some juice and water for Lily, as well as a small amount of baby formula that Sandra had prepared earlier for Hayley. The two sat in the clearing, placing Hayley down on a blanket as the other two lay down, eyes closed and on their backs. Lily took a specifically made gluten-free roll, and as she began to eat, she noticed Troy was just watching her, with a slight smile on his face.
Good?
He asked.
Well, I only fell in love with you because of your cooking.
Yeah, I know. I think I'm going to make a pretty alright trophy husband. Because all I got to do is cook for you and look good.
He said while striking a pose on the blanket. Lily slapped Troy while laughing.
And I suppose you're going to breastfeed her as well?
Give it time. I'll learn.
He chuckled as the two parents leaned against each other, looking up at the blue sky as the clouds parted overhead.
How's your dad?
Asked Troy, still nervous about how his daughter's grandfather felt.
He'll be alright. I mean, hopefully after 9 months of denial, he'll come around. Right?
She asked, a tone of anxiousness in her voice, Lily very strongly feeling the resentment from her father about the birth of Hayley.
I hope so. Even yesterday he seemed a little shook.
Don't worry. I'll make sure that he's there for us. He's got the money.
What about Camden?
He's over the moon to be an Uncle Troy.
Hey, I got something else.
He said as he reached into the basket, pulling out a bag of red frog lollies.
Your favourites.
He said as he brandished the bag.
I love you.
She said as she took the bag and kissed him on the cheek before sitting back on the blanket and ripping into it. Then Lily's phone beeped as she took it out and flipped it open.
What is it?
Asked Troy. Lily let out a deep sigh as her lip dropped.
The girls are ready for us.
Fuck,
said Troy. Soon, Hayley awakened, beginning to cry, startled by the phone beeping. The infant flailed her little arms around as Troy picked her up.
Hey, come here, darling. It's okay. It's okay.
He whispered, comforting his child. Lily soon snuggled up to the two as the new family sat calmly.
I think it might be time for her to come home.
Lily said.
Okay, come on, sweetie. Time to see the cot pop made for you.
Troy picked up his daughter as Lily carried the basket down the trail. They walked back for a few hundred metres before finding an old gum tree on the side of the path.
Remember this?
Troy asked Lily as he stopped in front of it, peering up at its sheer height and stature.
Yeah, I do.
This gum tree was so special to the pair because on the side of this very tree, facing away from the path, Down a slight slope was a minor marking that Troy had made a few months earlier, when they had learnt about the pregnancy and agreed to it. A simple mark and possibly slightly cheesy to some. However, to them it was an endearing sign of their relationship. A simple love heart carved into a tree with the symbols T+L.
I just had to make a slight change to this.
He said, pulling out a Swiss Army knife from his black jacket, and going to the marking before below the T+L, he carefully carved another part. Equals H.
What do you think?
Lily admired it for a second, taking Haley's small hand.
I think you're going to be a great dad.
She said before kissing him as the young couple headed back towards the car park to take their newborn home to their friends for the first time. The Black Commodore slowly drove through Hulls Creek as Troy was wary to get home too soon, knowing the festivities that would be in place for them upon their return. This was also being set up by many of Lily's friends who had been supporting her for months on end, constantly caring for her outside of school and at home, there for her to provide the emotional support required for someone so young giving birth. However, this had caused a slight rift between Troy and Lily's friends, because while he had begun doing after-school apprentice work for a local plumbing company, Jackson & Sons, her friends felt that he was focusing more on his future career rather than supporting his partner, and while Lily had tried to explain to them multiple times that this was for their future, the rift had already started to grow, meaning that Troy would much rather a simple night in with his newborn than an extravagant party with friends and family from all over town. On their drive home, they made their way past Hulls Creek High School, a recently refurbished secondary school to cater for the increased amount of interest in the town. The school was the centerpiece for the idea of a bright future for Hulls Creek, with its sleek architecture hopefully being a sign of modern thinking and engaging an entrepreneurial spirit out of their students, or at least that was what was promised by the mayor of Hulls Creek.
See that, Haley? That's where you're going to go to school.
Lily remarked before pinching Haley's toes as she let out a slight coo.
You think so? Can't aim higher?
Well, if you're going to make it rich, I'm sure we can bribe someone at Melbourne High.
I'll blackmail them. Threaten to clog their toilets.
Troy joked. Soon they had arrived home, turning into Troy's street, Bailey Court, where his parents' two-storey house sat at the end, at house number 12. As soon as Troy had made the turn into the street, he saw a colourful array of decorations outside the house. Seemingly hundreds of balloons tied to the mailbox, streamers decorating the fence line, Christmas lights had been dug up and strung from the gutters of the roof, and a massive banner reading, "Welcome back, Mum," as many of Lily's friends were out the front waving and already in tears as their friend approached. Lily's best friend Carly was at the front, and as the car parked by the curb out the front of the house, she was the first one Lily ran to as she sprinted from the car. However, Troy was not so enthused. None of his friends or family were outside, and he knew many of them wouldn't be coming to the party as several of his friends had ended previous bad relationships with many of Lily's friends, save for a select few who would be there. In fact, many of the guests at tonight's party were older friends of Owen and Ash's rather than his own. Troy sat silently in the car as now he was outside of this marvellous bubble that he had spent the last few hours inside of, where the world was simply one that revolved around Lily and Haley. Only now the consequences of having to deal with the social life of a father had dawned on him. He got out and unbuckled the seat, taking Haley out of her booster seat to meet everyone.
Alright, hun, we're gonna meet everyone. So be prepared. Gonna be a fucking shit show.
He murmured to Haley. He got out of the car and waved to all of Lily's friends before begrudgingly walking over and hugging Carly, only just noticing Sean watching him through the window. He gave Haley to Lily as she began to provide Haley with an introduction to all of her friends.
This is Auntie Carly, Auntie Georgia, Auntie Heather, Auntie Monica.
As the girls all fawned over Haley, Troy used this as an opportunity to sneak away from the adoring masses and make his way to the refuge of his house. However, there were even more people when Troy got inside. Many of Lily's friends, parents, a couple of Troy's friends, his parents, Owen and Ash, as well as Camden all exclaimed as he entered the house. Camden was the first to greet him, hugging him tight as soon as he entered.
"Hey, brother,"
he said as he sealed in Troy with a bear-like embrace.
Hey, buddy.
Troy wheezed as he took in all of the people around, as they all seemingly said hello and congratulations at once at him. The room had been decorated in balloons and streamers, all of the colour pink. Plenty of bowls of chips and plates of food covered in the main dining table, as well as another bowl of red frogs exclusively for Lily to snack on, that had been placed to the side.
And hello to all of you.
He was quite surprised by this whole situation. At that moment, Sean came in with a bottle of beer in his left hand and a glass of scotch in his right, placing the beer in Troy's hand, ruffling his hair, and without an ounce of warning, Sean began a speech.
Well, thank you all today. It's not every day that you become a grandfather, especially in your 40s.
This was followed by a significant laugh from the room, as Sean was quite obviously intoxicated. However, this was nothing short of a norm for him, as slowly Lily and the other girls began to enter into the room. Sean continued.
Now, I know today wasn't planned, but what can I say? My boy takes after his old man. But I think this is a situation we have to take as a blessing. Granted, a blessing with a pretty bloody big challenge given where you two are in life. But this is an opportunity, and the start of an adventure that everyone in this room, for better, for worse, is going to be a part in. Because we are all part of this little angel's life. So when we see Claire serve up some delicious food for her, or when Courtney eventually becomes her teacher, this is a chance for us all to come together and change this little princess's life, and shape her to be a person that can make her grandparents rich.
While the laughs continued, there was only one person not laughing, as Grant Rossiter leaned against a bench in the kitchen with a nervous expression on his face. Sean continued.
But Troy, mate, I'm so proud of you. You're a great man. And not every 18-year-old is up to the challenge of parenthood. But with the right teammate, anything is possible. And Lily, she's nothing short of the perfect partner. So Troy, I love you. Lily, I love you. And to my little granddaughter Haley, I love you, princess. And all of you, I fucking love the lot of yous. By this, and I know this is a bit fucking fancy for me, but a toast to my granddaughter, Haley Ellis. To Haley.
The room raised their drinks in unison and together bellowed.
To Haley.
As they all drank, Grant taking a whole glass of scotch down in one swig, as Troy also had a sip of beer. However, as he looked over, Lily looked uncomfortable, a look that Troy had not seen before, as he gave her a nod of reassurance. However, she did not return this, instead looking away from him, in what to Troy seemed like shame, before Sean grabbed Troy by his collar and dragged him over to some of his friends from the local football club. Altogether, there were around 80 people at this party, with Troy and Lily having to go around constantly, greeting each set of parents and friends, while having to take part in obligatory small talk. However, while Lily couldn't drink to help fuel the gears of conversation, Troy had slowly begun to start. An unwise decision given that on this day he had only had an egg and lettuce sandwich at the park, and he hadn't drunk in a large quantity for several months, wanting to support Lily through this time. But now, with the baby born, Troy had loosened these self-inflicted restraints, and the corks were popped and the drinks began to flow. Beer followed by whiskey, then vodka, even joining and doing a few tequila shots with Ash and Owen, all while consistently monitoring Lily and Haley. At one point in the evening, a large man came over to Troy. This was Donald Archer, one of Sean's friends, greeting him and shaking his hands, gripping it tightly.
Well done, Chief. She's a fine piece, ain't she?
Seemingly staring right through Lily as she spoke with Ash.
Yeah?
Troy tried to play along but was obviously disturbed by this statement, but knew he had to play it safe, smelling the stench of beer emanating from Donald.
How's things? Heard you bought a new house on the south side?
He asked, feigning interest.
Yeah, not bad at all, mate. House fucking sucks, but what can you do?
He laughed right in Troy's face.
Oh, hang on.
He said, and then grabbed a young girl and boy.
Hey, come meet the new daddy. Troy, this is my daughter Sophie, and my little tyke, Connor.
Hey guys, you gonna be a footy star like your dad, Connor?
He asked politely. Donald quickly dragged Troy's attention back to himself.
Don't count on it, mate. He got his mum's coordination in the gene pool. More likely to be an interpretive dancer than a footballer. Sophie's got it where it counts, though. But, you know, ain't much good you can do with a girl who's athletic.
Well, is she interested in netball or basketball?
What? So she can earn $10 a week? Not a chance. Soph, find your mum. Let's leave.
Okay, Dad.
Sophie replied, smiling at Troy before leaving. He again pulled in Troy and shook his hand.
But congrats, mate. Best of luck. Just don't go too hard, you know. Don't want 2 under your belt before you hit 20.
He whispered, looking over at Lily before winking at Troy. Troy didn't respond to Donald, and instead he just nodded as he walked away.
Prick.
Troy muttered under his breath. After a while, many of the parents had begun to leave, turning the event from a meet and greet for Haley to a teen house party. It was now 10:30 p.m. Troy watched as he noticed Owen getting close with one of Lily's friends, Heather, who seemed an odd choice for Owen, given how she was much quieter and reserved. But, for the first time in front of Troy, she appeared more talkative with Owen. Later on, Troy came over to Owen as the brothers embraced. Owen yelled in Troy's face, trying to combat the noise of the music. He too had had a few too many to drink.
Hey bro, how we going?
Fine, mate, fine. I see you getting along alright with Heather.
Owen made a maybe gesture to him.
She seems cool, so we'll see. You all good?
Troy's reply was slurred.
Oh, I'm pretty fucked.
He then spotted Lily coming down from the stairs. Although she was wiping a tear away, Troy made his way over to her, clumsily falling into her.
Oh god, babe, I'm so sorry. Hey, are you alright?
Lily looked into his eyes, obviously broken up about something before Troy took off his jacket and placed it around her.
What's up?
He asked as he rubbed her arms, trying to comfort her.
I'm sorry, but I can't.
Why?
I'll tell you tomorrow. When you're sober.
She got up and headed out to the backyard where many of her friends were, and as Troy was about to follow, Ash came up to him, intercepting him from helping Lily.
Come on, mate. Do a shot with me.
Ash, I gotta...
But before Troy could give a good response, Ash had placed the shot glass in his hand.
To Hayley, yeah?
Troy was barely focused, with his current worrying for Lily, as well as being on the knife edge of blacking out. His head swirled around, the room turning faster and faster, both vertically and horizontally, as Ash guided the shot into his mouth, with Owen cheering as he did so. Troy's head then dropped as soon as he had consumed the shot, resting his arms on the counter, pounding the countertop with his fist. He approached Owen, who had Heather in his arms.
Oh, I've got such a fucking headache.
He moaned.
Not now, mate.
Owen grunted as he pushed Troy away. Then, Camden approached him.
Where's your parents?
Asked Troy. Camden shouted in his ear.
They left, but Lily gave them Hayley so she could sleep. Don't worry, she's safe.
Cheers, mate.
Troy kissed Camden clumsily on the forehead before he started to make his way toward the stairway to his upstairs bedroom, taking one last look back for Lily, but he couldn't see her. The only thing of note he spotted was Owen and Heather kissing in the dark corner of the room. Troy began to pull himself up the stairs, each step feeling like an eternity, as if he were wearing cinder blocks for shoes, constantly slipping on the carpeted steps. By the time he got to the top of the stairs, his energy had been depleted, sitting against the drywall before dragging himself towards his bedroom door. As he made his way past Owen's room, he could clearly distinguish the sounds of drunken teenage sex in the room. Before he arrived at his door, he propped himself up, stumbled towards his bed, which thank God was empty, and fell onto his soft mattress, belly up, as he closed his eyes, blowing a kiss to the ceiling.
Good night, Hayley. Daddy loves you.
Troy Ellis soon fell asleep as the party continued downstairs. The digital clock on his bedside table read 11:12 p.m. July 3rd, 2005. Troy's alarm went off loudly at 10 a.m. the following morning, almost instantaneously causing him to have a horrid reaction to the obnoxious beeping, letting out a massive groan before turning his face down on the mattress, his arm reaching towards the alarm before finally managing to hit the snooze button. He lay for about 10 seconds before having the realization.
Lily!
As quickly as he could, he sprung out of bed. His hair had been completely disheveled, a juxtaposition from his usual well-groomed appearance. Puffy eyes greeted his bathroom mirror, only serving to make the look even more appealing. As he got up and attempted to make haste, but after the first step, the hangover began to set in. He rested his head against the door before opening it and walking down the stairs. Arriving in the living room, however, there was no one present. There was no shortage of rubbish, cups and bottles everywhere, which his parents wouldn't have had time to clean due to their early starts at work. His father was at a work site and his mother was at the hospital. Troy stumbled through the mess and finally reached the kitchen, opening the fridge and removing a 2-litre bottle of orange juice, removing the cap and downing about a half a litre right where he stood, before slamming down the bottle on the counter. He pulled out his phone and his first instinct was to call Lily, finding her contact. As he waited, he pulled out the bacon and eggs from the fridge, placing them on a pan, and within a minute his breakfast was sizzling away. He called up Lily, waiting as he flipped the bacon, but no answer came. Then he tried both his parents. Nothing. He then called Sandra Rossiter, with no response. He dreaded calling Grant, so didn't bother, instead assuming that everyone was busy this Sunday morning, perhaps down at the farmer's market or watching the juniors play football. Anyway, Troy soon had his breakfast ready as he turned off the stove, settling down to eat 2 slices of bread, bacon and eggs, and a tall glass of orange juice. However, before he dug in, he tried calling Lily one last time, and as he did so, he heard a low buzz of a phone vibrating coming from the couches. Troy made his way over and started looking around, eventually digging through crevices of the couch and finding Lily's phone buzzing. Flipping it open to see incoming call, Troy Ellis. Troy took a deep breath and collapsed into the couch, his foot beginning to tap, his hands shaking, and then the doorbell rang. Troy quickly sprung up and approached the door, flinging it open to reveal 2 police officers with solemn looks on their face and their caps in their hands. Officer Carter, a young man, stepped towards him.
Troy Ellis?
Yes?
He replied shakily.
Can we have a word with you? It's about Lily Rossiter. We're sorry to inform you that we found her this morning.
The next half an hour was a blur, as Troy was soon in the backseat of a police car, completely emotionless as he was taken to Wombat's post. He was still unsure whether this was a joke, perhaps a practical joke as punishment from Lily for his drunken state the previous night. However, when they arrived, multiple ambulances were at the scene, police cars were aplenty and several citizens had crowded the car park. Troy was led down a pathway, the same one that he and Lily had walked the day before. With every step that he took, the possibility of the officer's words being true grew more and more, becoming a miracle that he was still able to continue walking considering his mind and body were in two completely separate places. The police took him forward, but Troy could also determine that the grip from Officer Carter had slightly tightened more than he had anticipated. They passed the gum tree where Troy had made his carvings, before reaching the top of a small slope where Troy spotted a white tent about 50 meters in front of him. He dropped to his knees as all of the breath escaped his body. Officer Carter attempted to hold him up, but Troy was anchored to the ground. His tears began to flow, and he began to moan in pain. They slowly trudged over to the tent where many paramedics, forensic scientists and police officers had surrounded the site, as well as several onlookers being kept at a distance behind police lines. Troy was brought to the area where he saw a white sheet over a very definitive outline of a body. He began to cry. He wanted to ask questions, but the sheer guttural pain he felt restrained any coherent noise from escaping as they took him inside the tent, where several detectives conversed. He was sat there emotionless, and while no one had confirmed it, Troy fully knew what had happened. Before long, one of the detectives came forward to Troy as they presented him with two very familiar items.
Mr. Ellis, we found these two items at the scene, and we believe that they both belong to you.
In one hand, sealed in a vacuum bag, there was a black jacket with a few red splotches, and in her other hand, his Swiss Army knife with the blade of the knife protracted, covered in what was very clearly blood. Troy reached out to them as the detective slowly pulled away.
Can you confirm that these belong to you?
He looked down in shock, and his hands began to shake as he looked up and slowly nodded.
They are,
said the detective over the radio, before leaving Troy, cold, alone, and fearful for his life. Troy's anxiety got the better of him as he slowly left the chair, sneaking out of the tent while many of the officers were preoccupied with the evidence that lay before them. He looked around, seeing many more onlookers, more officers, more emergency response workers at the scene, even noticing a flash from a nearby journalist capturing an image as he walked forward. What followed next was a shriek, as he looked over just in time to see Sandra Rossiter leap at him, tackling him to the ground, screaming as she began to slap him and punch him.
What did you do to her, you fucking monster? You fucking killer! How could you?
Sandra continuously pummeled Troy before she was ripped away by police officers. Troy was in shock as he began to crawl backwards in terror, as the situation had now completely overwhelmed him. He looked back to see Grant, who was currently dealing with Camden, who had passed out in shock from the news of his sister. Grant and Troy's eyes meeting as Grant looked at him with horror. Troy, too, was frozen with fear. The cameras from the reporters continuously flashed, as he could hear their voices of judgment, picking up distinct words and phrases, like Ellis, or he's the one. He slowly stumbled backwards as fear took a firm grip of him. As he began to run, he bumped into one young female reporter, causing her to fall back as Troy got away.
Get back here!
He heard Sandra yell in the distance as a few officers called after him and began to take chase. He broke past police lines and sprinted down the pathway, eventually making out his mother and father coming from the other direction in the distance, guided by a police officer. As he collided with them, Sean grabbed him by the arms.
Hey, buddy. What's going on?
Sean tried to calm down Troy as Diane also came to him.
Sweetie, what's wrong? Is Lily okay?
Troy looked at his parents with pure panic as he noticed his father's car keys in his hands, ripping them from Sean before sprinting down the pathway, pushing past those walking to the scene. Eventually he reached the parking lot. Troy's football background made him more athletic than the officers chasing him and left them far behind, although he could still hear their voices. He found his father's Commodore parked at the edge of the barbecue area and got in, quickly turning the car on as he backed out, rear-ending a red Toyota Corolla on the way out. However, he took no care of this as he sped out the driveway. A few officers arrived in the car park to see him drive out and make the direction he was going. But it was too late, as Troy was now out on the open road and fleeing the crime scene. Troy white-knuckled the steering wheel as he sobbed, speeding down suburban streets at 90 kilometers an hour in a 60-kilometer speed zone. Weaving past cars with no particular direction, each tree he passed looked more appealing, perhaps driving into one and ending this horrible nightmare that he had woken up to. However, as the thoughts grew darker in his head, he had a realization as the car screeched to a halt, the Commodore braking in the middle of the street before making a violent U-turn and heading in a different direction. As Troy continued to drive, his breathing got easier and less panicked, making his final turn onto Plainview Drive, screeching in front of a large house that resembled that of a small manor. He got out and sprinted to the front door, turning the knob aggressively.
Fucking come on!
He yelled frantically before going back to the car, picking out a crowbar and storming back to the front door, smashing in one of the glass panels near the doorknob. He reached through and, despite cutting himself on several loose shards of glass, he opened the door and entered. Troy went through the house, looking everywhere and in every room of the first floor, before eventually he heard a crying noise coming from the top floor. He went upstairs, still brandishing the crowbar, as he barged through a door. The door to Lily's room. He stood at the entrance like a murderer in a horror movie, his hands soaked in blood while holding a makeshift weapon. He dropped it, stumbling forward to a small cot by the side of Lily's bed, where Haley was all alone, forgotten amongst the madness. Troy kneeled next to his baby's cot as he picked up Haley. As she screamed and wailed, Troy pulled her in close.
Hey, it's alright. Daddy's here. Daddy's here.
Troy Ellis sat against the wall in Lily's room, his blood soaking the clothes of himself and Haley, but he could only admire her. He sat there muttering small words to her, talking himself into a state of calmness as Haley began to ease into his arms. And all that was a father and his daughter.